The money had run out 3 days before Tessa Malone reached the winter settlement outside Colfax, California. And when the wagon master told her the price for passage north through the mountain passes, she knew what she had to do. She unbuttoned the only coat she owned, the wool one her mother had sewn with careful stitches 2 winters before she died, and laid it across the tailgate of his supply wagon without letting her hands shake. The January wind of 1867 cut through her thin cotton dress immediately, raising gooseflesh along her arms and back. But Tessa kept her chin high as the wagon master examined the coat with calculating eyes. He was a hard man with a harder face, weathered by decades on the trail, and she watched him run his fingers over the seams and buttons before he finally nodded. "Good enough," he said, folding it over his arm. "We leave at dawn. Don't be late or I'll give your spot to someone else." Tessa nodded and walked away before he could see her teeth chattering. The settlement was nothing more than a cluster of tents and rough timber buildings thrown up to serve the miners and travelers passing through the Sierra Nevada foothills. She had spent the last of her coins on a meal of beans and hardtack the night before, and now she had nothing except the clothes on her back, a small canvas bag with her mother's Bible and a silver locket, and the desperate hope that her aunt in Oregon Territory would take her in. The sun was setting behind the pine-covered hills, and the temperature was dropping fast. Tessa wrapped her arms around herself and hurried toward the livery stable where the wagon master had said she could sleep in the loft. Other travelers were already settling in for the night, their campfires dotting the settlement like fallen stars. She caught the scent of roasting meat and coffee, and her stomach twisted with hunger, but she pushed the feeling aside. She had been hungry before. She would survive. The livery was dim and smelled of horses and hay. Tessa climbed the ladder to the loft, found a corner away from the other travelers, and curled up on the straw. The cold seeped through the wooden slats, and she pulled her arms tighter around her body, trying to conserve what little warmth she had left. Sleep would not come easily, but she had learned to endure discomfort. She had learned to endure many things since her father died in the war, and the bank took their farm in Missouri. The journey west had been her last hope for a new beginning, but the reality of the frontier was harsher than any story she had read. Hours passed in fitful dozing, her body shivering so violently that her muscles ached. When she finally fell into an exhausted sleep, she dreamed of her mother's kitchen, warm and filled with the smell of bread baking. She woke to voices below, the stamping of horses, and the gray light of pre-dawn filtering through the cracks in the walls. Tessa climbed down the ladder on stiff, cold legs. The wagon master was already hitching his team, and a handful of other travelers were loading their belongings. She joined them silently, hugging herself against the bitter wind. The sky was overcast, heavy with the promise of more cold weather, possibly even snow in the higher elevations. "You the girl who paid with the coat?" a woman asked, eyeing her threadbare dress with disapproval. She was middle-aged, wrapped in layers of wool and fur, with a pinched face that suggested she found fault with most things. "Yes, madam," Tessa said quietly. "Foolish, traveling in winter with nothing warm to wear. You will catch your death." Tessa had no answer for that because the woman was probably right. She turned away and waited by the wagon, trying not to think about how many days the journey would take or how much colder it would get as they climbed into the mountains. The wagon master called out orders, and the travelers began to board. Tessa found a spot near the back, wedged between barrels of supplies and a family with 3 small children. The mother gave her a sympathetic look but said nothing. They all had their own troubles. The wagon lurched forward, and the settlement fell away behind them. The road was rough, rutted from previous travelers, and climbed steadily through forests of pine and oak. The cold air cut through Tessa's dress like knives, and she tucked her hands under her arms, hunching her shoulders against the wind. Her lips were already chapped, and she could feel the tips of her ears going numb. They had been traveling for perhaps 2 hours when a rider appeared alongside the wagon. Tessa noticed him first because his horse was a striking gray dapple, tall and well-muscled, the kind of animal that spoke of money and care. The rider himself was young, perhaps in his mid-20s, with dark hair that curled slightly at the edges beneath his wide-brimmed hat. He wore a heavy sheepskin coat, leather gloves, and had a rifle secured to his saddle. His face was lean and tanned, with a strong jaw and eyes the color of creek water in summer. He spoke briefly with the wagon master, then fell back to ride alongside the wagon bed. His gaze swept over the passengers and stopped on Tessa. She saw his eyes narrow slightly, taking in her shivering form and inadequate clothing. He looked away, then back again, as if trying to make sense of what he was seeing. The wagon hit a particularly deep rut, and Tessa grabbed the side to keep from being thrown into the barrels. When she looked up again, the rider was gone. She told herself it did not matter. Strangers on the trail came and went. She would likely never see him again. But an hour later, when they stopped to rest the horses, the rider dismounted and approached the wagon master. Tessa could not hear their conversation, but she saw the wagon master gesture in her direction. The rider's expression was unreadable as he walked over to where she sat, still huddled in the wagon bed. "Madam," he said, touching the brim of his hat. His voice was deep and carried a hint of somewhere southern, though not as pronounced as some she had heard. "The wagon master tells me you traded your coat for passage." Tessa nodded, unsure where this was going. "Yes, sir. That is a dangerous choice in January, especially heading into the mountains." His tone was not judgmental, merely stating a fact. "I did not have another option," Tessa said, lifting her chin despite the chattering of her teeth. "I have family in Oregon Territory. I need to reach them." The cowboy studied her for a long moment, and Tessa felt something shift in the air between them. It was not pity in his eyes, exactly, but something closer to understanding. He nodded once, as if coming to a decision, then began unbuttoning his sheepskin coat. "What are you doing?" Tessa asked, alarmed. "Something my mother would tan my hide for not doing sooner," he said, pulling the coat off and holding it out to her. "Take it." "I cannot." Tessa shook her head firmly. "You will freeze." "I have layers," he said, and she could see he was telling the truth. Beneath the sheepskin, he wore a thick wool shirt and a leather vest. "And I have been working cattle in winter since I was 14. I know how to manage the cold. You, however, are about 2 hours from serious trouble if you do not warm up." Tessa stared at the coat, then at him. No stranger had ever shown her such kindness. "I do not even know your name." "Fletcher Sutton," he said. "And you are?" "Tessa Malone." She hesitated, then reached out and took the coat. It was still warm from his body, and the relief was immediate as she pulled it around her shoulders. The coat swallowed her small frame, the sleeves hanging well past her hands, but she had never felt anything so wonderful. "Thank you, Mr. Sutton. I do not know how to repay you." "No repayment needed," Fletcher said. "Just promise me you will take better care of yourself. The frontier is no place for unnecessary risks." "Says the man who just gave away his coat," Tessa said, and was surprised to find herself almost smiling, despite her exhaustion and cold. Fletcher's mouth quirked at one corner, not quite a smile, but close. "I suppose that's fair." He touched his hat brim again and turned to go, then paused. "We will be stopping for the night at a way station about 6 hours north. There's a fireplace there. Make sure you get a spot near it." Before Tessa could respond, he was walking back to his horse. She watched him mount in one fluid motion, struck by the easy confidence in his movements. He rode ahead to speak with the wagon master again, and Tessa pulled his coat tighter around herself, breathing in the scent of leather and pine and something uniquely masculine. She felt the warmth seeping into her bones, and for the first time since trading away her mother's coat, she thought she might actually survive this journey. The wagon rolled on through the morning, the landscape growing more rugged as they climbed. Tessa dozed fitfully, exhausted from her sleepless night and lulled by the motion of the wagon. When she woke, the sun was past its zenith, and snow had begun to fall in lazy flakes. She pulled the sheepskin coat tighter and looked around for Fletcher Sutton. He was riding alongside the wagon again, though farther back this time, keeping pace with the slow-moving convoy. When he noticed her watching, he nodded. Tessa nodded back, feeling oddly self-conscious. The family beside her, the mother was nursing the youngest child beneath a heavy blanket, had noticed the exchange. "That is Fletcher Sutton," the woman said quietly. "He runs cattle on a ranch north of here. Good man from what I hear. Honest." "He gave me his coat," Tessa said, as if that explained everything. "I saw." The woman smiled slightly. "Not many men would do such a thing for a stranger. You are fortunate." Tessa supposed she was. She had felt anything but fortunate these past months, since leaving Missouri with little more than hope and determination. The journey west had stripped away her illusions about frontier life. She had seen death and desperation, had gone hungry more nights than not, had learned that kindness was a rare commodity in a hard land. Fletcher Sutton's gesture felt like a small miracle. The snow fell more heavily as the afternoon wore on, blanketing the pines and muffling the sounds of the wagon and horses. The temperature continued to drop. Tessa was grateful for the coat, but she worried about Fletcher. She could see him ahead, sitting straight in his saddle despite the cold, his shoulders dusted with snow. He must be freezing. When they finally reached the way station, twilight was falling and the snow was several inches deep. The building was a rough log structure with a barn attached, smoke rising from the chimney. The wagon master pulled the team to a halt, and passengers began climbing down stiffly, their movements slow from hours of cold travel. Tessa's legs nearly buckled when she stepped onto the ground. She steadied herself against the wagon and waited for the feeling to return to her feet. Fletcher appeared beside her, seemingly from nowhere, and took her elbow. "Easy," he said. "Give yourself a minute." "I'm fine," Tessa said automatically, but she did not pull away. His hand was steady and warm even through the layers of clothing, and she needed the support more than her pride wanted to admit. "Stubborn," Fletcher observed, but there was no criticism in his tone. "Come on, let us get you inside before you freeze to the ground." He guided her toward the way station, his hand still on her elbow. The other travelers were crowding through the door, eager for warmth. Inside, the main room was dominated by a large stone fireplace where a fire already blazed. The space was cramped and smelled of wood smoke, unwashed bodies, and cooking food, but it was warm. Fletcher steered Tessa toward the fireplace, using his size and presence to clear a space for her near the hearth. "Stay here," he said firmly. "I will see about getting you some hot food." Before Tessa could protest, he was gone. She sank down onto the rough wooden bench near the fire and held her hands out to the flames. The heat was almost painful on her frozen skin, but gradually the shivering eased. She became aware of the other travelers staring at her, at the oversized sheepskin coat that clearly belonged to a man, and she felt her cheeks heat with something other than warmth from the fire. Fletcher returned carrying 2 tin cups of coffee and a plate with bread and stew. He handed her 1 cup and the plate, then sat down beside her. "Eat slowly," he advised. "Your stomach will rebel if you rush." Tessa wanted to ask how he had managed to secure food when others were still waiting, but her hunger overrode her curiosity. She sipped the coffee first, black and bitter, but gloriously hot, then took a small bite of bread. It was hard and tasteless, but she chewed it carefully and swallowed. "Where in Oregon Territory is your family?" Fletcher asked, cradling his own cup between his hands. "Near the Willamette Valley," Tessa said. "My aunt married a farmer there. She wrote to my mother years ago, said there was good land and opportunity." She took another sip of coffee. "My mother passed 2 years ago, and my father before that, in the war. The farm was mortgaged, and the bank took it. I had nowhere else to go." Fletcher was quiet for a moment, watching the fire. "That's a hard road you have traveled." "Many have traveled harder," Tessa said, thinking of the graves she had seen along the trail, the children who had died of fever, the families torn apart by accident and misfortune. "I am still alive. That is more than some can say. Still." Fletcher turned to look at her, and in the firelight, his eyes seemed more green than blue. "You should not have had to trade your only coat for passage. The wagon master should have extended you credit or found another way." "The wagon master is running a business, not a charity," Tessa said. "I knew the terms when I agreed. Terms that could have killed you." There was an edge to Fletcher's voice now, something sharp beneath the calm surface. "If I had not come along, if the temperature had dropped another 10 degrees, you would have been in serious danger?" Tessa set down her cup and met his gaze directly. "Mr. Sutton, I appreciate your concern and your generosity more than I can say. But I have been making difficult choices since I was 16 years old, and I am still here. I do what I must to survive." Fletcher held her gaze for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I can see that." He paused. "How old are you, if you do not mind my asking?" 21, Tessa said. "Old enough to know the world is not kind to women alone." 21, Fletcher repeated, as if testing the words. "I am 26. 5 years is not so much." Tessa blinked, surprised by the non sequitur. "I suppose not." Fletcher looked like he wanted to say more, but the wagon master chose that moment to stand and announce the sleeping arrangements. The women and children would sleep inside the way station, the men in the barn. They would depart again at dawn. Tessa finished her stew quickly, scraping the tin plate clean. She had not realized how hungry she was until she started eating, and now her stomach was demanding more. But there would be no more food until morning, and she was lucky to have gotten what she did. As the travelers began settling in for the night, spreading bedrolls and claiming spots on the floor, Fletcher stood. "Keep the coat tonight," he said. "I will retrieve it in the morning." "But you will need it," Tessa protested. "The barn is sheltered, and there is hay for insulation. I will manage." He touched his hat brim. "Sleep well, Miss Malone." He was gone before Tessa could argue further. She stared after him, puzzled by his kindness and by the odd comment about their ages. What difference did 5 years make? The woman from the wagon approached, carrying her youngest child. "You can spread your bedroll near mine," she offered. "Safety in numbers." "I do not have a bedroll," Tessa admitted. "I sold it in Sacramento to buy food." The woman's expression softened. "Then you will share mine. My name is Margaret, by the way. Margaret Porter. This is my husband Thomas and our children. Tessa Malone." "Thank you, Mrs. Porter." They settled near the fireplace, and Margaret produced a worn wool blanket that she insisted Tessa share. With the blanket, Fletcher's coat, and the warmth of the fire, Tessa was more comfortable than she had been in weeks. She fell asleep quickly, her last thought of a cowboy with green-blue eyes who had given a stranger his coat without hesitation. She woke to the sound of voices and the gray light of dawn filtering through the small windows. Her body ached from sleeping on the hard floor, and her stomach was hollow with hunger, but she felt more rested than she had in days. She returned the blanket to Margaret with thanks, then went outside to wash her face in the icy water from the pump. Fletcher was already awake, checking his horse's hooves near the barn. When he saw Tessa, he straightened and walked over. "Good morning, Miss Malone. How did you sleep?" "Better than I had any right to expect," Tessa said honestly. She began unbuttoning the sheepskin coat. "Thank you again for this. I will return it now." "Keep it for today," Fletcher said. "The weather is not improving, and we still have a long climb ahead." "Mr. Sutton, I cannot keep taking from you without giving anything back." "You are not taking," Fletcher said patiently. "I am offering. There is a difference." "But what about you? You will freeze." Fletcher smiled, and the expression transformed his serious face, making him seem younger and more approachable. "Miss Malone, I have been driving cattle through blizzards since I was old enough to sit a horse. I promise you I will not freeze. Now stop arguing and keep the coat before you insult my honor as a gentleman." Tessa opened her mouth, then closed it. She could see the determination in his eyes and knew she would not win this argument. "Very well, but only for today." "Only for today," Fletcher agreed, though something in his tone suggested he did not entirely mean it. The wagon master called for everyone to load up. Tessa climbed back into the wagon bed, and Fletcher mounted his gray horse. As the convoy began to move, she noticed he stayed closer to the wagon than he had the day before, riding parallel to her position. Every so often she would catch him looking her way, as if checking to make sure she was still there, still warm enough. It was oddly comforting, having someone watch over her, even a stranger. Tessa had been alone for so long, relying only on herself, that she had forgotten what it felt like to have someone care about her welfare. She found herself watching Fletcher in return, noting the easy way he sat his horse, the way he scanned the tree line constantly, alert for danger. He carried himself like a man accustomed to responsibility, to making decisions and seeing them through. The day passed slowly. The snow stopped, but the sky remained overcast and the air bit with cold. They stopped briefly at midday to rest the horses, and Fletcher appeared with more bread and dried meat, which he shared with Tessa without comment. She tried to refuse, knowing he must be hungry himself, but he simply placed the food in her hands and walked away before she could protest. "He is courting you," Margaret said, watching the exchange with knowing eyes. Tessa felt her cheeks flush. "He's being kind to someone in need. That is all." "That's how it starts," Margaret said wisely. "My Thomas brought me flowers every day for a month before he finally worked up the courage to ask my father for permission to court me. Men show their intentions through actions before words." "We only met yesterday," Tessa pointed out. "You cannot court someone you barely know." "Can you not?" Margaret smiled. My grandmother married my grandfather 3 days after they met. They were together for 52 years. Sometimes you just know. Tessa did not know what to say to that. She ate her bread and meat in silence, her thoughts churning. She had no business thinking about courtship or marriage. She was penniless, on her way to impose on relatives who might not even want her. She had nothing to offer a man like Fletcher Sutton, who clearly had means and property and a life already established. But that night, when they stopped at another rough-way station and Fletcher once again secured food for her and made sure she had a warm spot by the fire, Tessa found herself wondering what it would be like to have someone care for her permanently, to not face the world alone. The thought was both terrifying and deeply appealing. Over the next 3 days, a pattern emerged. Fletcher rode alongside the wagon during the day, keeping watch. At the rest stops, he brought Tessa food and coffee. At night, he made sure she was settled comfortably before he went to sleep in the barn with the other men. They spoke little, just brief exchanges, but Tessa found herself increasingly aware of his presence, of the way her heart would lift when she saw him riding toward the wagon, of how she looked for him first thing each morning. On the 4th day, they reached the highest point of the mountain pass. The landscape was stark and beautiful, snow-covered peaks stretching in every direction. The cold was intense, but Tessa barely felt it wrapped in Fletcher's coat. She was staring at the view when Fletcher rode up beside the wagon. "Beautiful, is it not?" he said. "Breathtaking," Tessa agreed. "I have never seen mountains like this." "They can be deadly," Fletcher said, "but yes, beautiful. I never tire of them." He paused. "Miss Malone, I have been thinking." "About what, Mr. Sutton?" "About your situation." Fletcher's hands tightened on the reins. "You said your aunt lives near the Willamette Valley. That's still several weeks of travel from where this wagon train ends." "I know," Tessa said quietly. "I will find work in whatever town we reach, save money, and continue the journey when I can." "Or," Fletcher said carefully, "you could come to my ranch." Tessa's heart stuttered. "What?" "My ranch is 2 days' ride from where the wagon train stops. I have a housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, who is getting on in years. She has been asking me to hire help. You could work for me, save your money in a safe place, and when you are ready to continue to Oregon, I will pay for your passage and give you a letter of reference." Tessa stared at him, torn between hope and suspicion. "Why would you do that?" Fletcher met her gaze steadily. "Because I do not like the idea of you alone in a rough mining town, trying to find work. You have seen what the frontier is like. It is not safe for a woman on her own. At the ranch, you would have a roof over your head, regular meals, and honest work." "Mr. Sutton, we barely know each other." "That is true," Fletcher acknowledged, "but I know enough. I know you are brave enough to cross half a continent alone. I know you are resourceful enough to survive when most would have given up. I know you are proud but not foolish. Those are the qualities I value in a person." He paused. "And I know that you deserve better than whatever uncertain fate awaits you in a town full of miners and drifters." Tessa's throat tightened. She wanted to say yes immediately, but caution held her back. What would people say? An unmarried woman living on a ranch with an unmarried man? They would say I hired help, which is the truth. Mrs. Chen lives in the main house. There's a small cabin on the property that was built for the foreman before he retired. You would stay there, completely separate. Everything would be proper. Fletcher's expression was earnest. "I'm not asking for anything improper, Miss Malone. I am offering honest work and a safe place. That is all." That is all, Tessa thought, but even as she thought it, she knew it was not all. There was something between them, something that had been building since the moment he wrapped his coat around her shoulders. She could feel it in the way he looked at her, in the care he had shown, in the way her pulse quickened whenever he was near. But he was offering work, not courtship, a practical solution to her immediate problem. She would be foolish to refuse because of romantic notions that might be entirely one-sided. "I accept," Tessa said. "Thank you, Mr. Sutton. I will work hard and repay your kindness." Fletcher's face relaxed into something like relief. "I have no doubt you will." He touched his hat brim and rode ahead, leaving Tessa to sit with her decision. Margaret leaned over. "You're going to his ranch?" "To work," Tessa said firmly. "He needs help, and I need employment. It is a practical arrangement." "Of course it is," Margaret said, but she was smiling. The wagon train descended from the mountains over the next 2 days. the landscape gradually changing from snow-covered peaks to forested valleys. The air grew slightly warmer, though January still held the land in its grip. Tessa found herself looking forward to reaching the end of the journey, to seeing Fletcher's ranch, to having a place to rest and recover from the long weeks of travel. They arrived in a settlement called Grass Valley late on a gray afternoon. It was larger than Tessa had expected, with several streets of businesses and houses, the evidence of mining operations visible in the scarred hillsides surrounding the town. The wagon master pulled the convoy to a halt in the main square, and passengers began disembarking, gathering their belongings, calling out farewells. Tessa climbed down from the wagon with her small canvas bag. Margaret hugged her goodbye, made her promise to write if she ever made it to Oregon, and then the Porter family was gone, swallowed by the crowd. Tessa stood alone in the square, feeling suddenly uncertain. Fletcher appeared at her elbow. "My horse is at the livery. I need to collect him and gather some supplies. There is a hotel across the street. Wait for me in the lobby where it is warm." "I do not have money for a hotel," Tessa said. "You will not need any. Just wait inside." Fletcher's tone was gentle but firm. "Please, Miss Malone, indulge me." Tessa nodded and crossed to the hotel. The lobby was small but clean, with a stove radiating heat and several chairs arranged near the window. She sat down and watched the activity in the street, her hands folded in her lap. She was still wearing Fletcher's coat, and she realized with a start that she had been wearing it for nearly a week. It felt like hers now, comfortable and familiar, and she would be sorry to return it. Fletcher returned an hour later, leading his gray horse and a second horse, a brown mare with a gentle face. He came into the lobby and motioned for Tessa to follow him. Outside, he gestured to the mare. "This is Rosie. She is steady and even-tempered. Have you ridden before?" "On a farm, but that was years ago," Tessa said. "It will come back to you." Fletcher showed her how to mount, adjusting the stirrups for her shorter legs. "We have about 3 hours of daylight left. My ranch is a good day's ride, but there's a cabin about 4 hours north where we can stop for the night. We will reach the ranch by late afternoon tomorrow." Tessa settled into the saddle, gripping the reins. Fletcher mounted his own horse with easy grace, and they set out, leaving Grass Valley behind. The road was well-traveled, cutting through valleys and alongside streams. They rode in companionable silence, and Tessa found herself relaxing into the rhythm of the horse's gait. As the sun began to set, Fletcher turned off the main road onto a narrow trail that led through a grove of pine trees. A small cabin appeared, nestled in a clearing. Smoke rose from the chimney, and lamplight glowed in the windows. "A friend of mine uses this place when he is trapping," Fletcher explained as they dismounted. "He told me we could stop here if needed." Inside, the cabin was simple but clean, with a fireplace, a table and chairs, and 2 narrow beds separated by a curtain. Fletcher immediately set about building up the fire while Tessa explored. There were supplies in the cupboard: coffee, flour, beans, salt pork, enough to make a simple meal. "I will cook," Tessa said, grateful to have something useful to do. "It is the least I can do after all you have done for me." Fletcher did not argue. He went back outside to tend the horses while Tessa prepared beans and salt pork, making coffee in a battered pot. When Fletcher returned, she had the food ready and the table set. They ate in silence, both hungry from the day's ride. When they finished, Fletcher leaned back in his chair and studied Tessa across the table. "Tomorrow you will see the ranch. It is not much to look at, but it is home." "Tell me about it," Tessa said. Fletcher's expression softened. 300 acres of good grazing land with a creek that runs year-round. The house is 2 stories, built from logs my father and I cut ourselves. There's a barn, a bunkhouse for the hands, corrals, and that foreman's cabin I mentioned. We run about 200 head of cattle, though I am hoping to expand." "Your father helped build it?" Tessa asked. "He died 6 years ago before the house was finished. My mother passed when I was 12. It has just been me since then." Fletcher's voice was matter-of-fact, but Tessa heard the loneliness beneath the words. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "Losing family is hard." "Yes." Fletcher met her eyes. "But life continues. You build something new." Tessa understood what he was saying. They were both survivors, both shaped by loss, both trying to carve out a future in an unforgiving land. Perhaps that was why they had recognized something in each other from the start. That night, Tessa slept in one of the narrow beds while Fletcher took the other, the curtain drawn between them for propriety. She lay awake for a long time, listening to the crackle of the fire and the sound of Fletcher's breathing. She felt safe for the first time in months, and the feeling was intoxicating. They rose at dawn, ate a quick breakfast of coffee and hardtack, and set out again. The landscape grew more familiar to Fletcher, and Tessa could see him relaxing, his posture easing. They stopped briefly at midday to rest the horses and eat dried meat, then continued on. Late in the afternoon, they crested a rise and Fletcher pointed. "There, that is home." Tessa looked down into a broad valley. A creek sparkled in the winter sunlight, and she could see a 2-story log house, a barn, several outbuildings. Cattle grazed in the distance and smoke rose from the house's chimney. It was beautiful in its simplicity, a testament to hard work and determination. "It is wonderful," Tessa said honestly. Fletcher smiled, and she saw pride in his face. "Come on, let us get you settled." They rode down into the valley, and as they approached the house, a woman emerged. She was small and elderly, with gray hair pulled back in a bun and an apron tied over her dress. Her face was weathered but kind, with eyes that missed nothing. "Fletcher," she called in accented English, "you are back. I was beginning to worry." "Sorry, Mrs. Chen. The trip took longer than expected." Fletcher dismounted and helped Tessa down from her horse. "This is Miss Tessa Malone. She's going to be helping you with the house and cooking." Mrs. Chen looked Tessa up and down, taking in the threadbare dress beneath Fletcher's oversized coat, the tired eyes, the too thin frame. Her expression softened. "Welcome, Miss Malone. You look exhausted. Come inside and I will make tea." Tessa followed Mrs. Chen into the house, Fletcher trailing behind. The interior was warm and smelled of bread and wood smoke. The main room had a large fireplace, comfortable furniture, and windows that let in plenty of light. It was rustic but well-maintained, the home of someone who took pride in what he had built. Mrs. Chen bustled about putting a kettle on to boil, setting out cups. "Fletcher, show her the cabin. Let her see where she will be staying. Then come back for supper." Fletcher nodded and led Tessa back outside. They walked a short distance to a small cabin set apart from the main house. It was built of logs like the main house, with a single room, a fireplace, a bed, a table and chairs, and a cupboard. Simple, but clean and dry. "The previous foreman lived here for 10 years, Fletcher said. "When he retired, I had it cleaned out and made ready for someone new. I've been managing the ranch hands myself, but Mrs. Chen said you could use it." He paused. "There are blankets in the chest, firewood stacked outside. If you need anything else, just ask." Tessa set down her canvas bag and turned to face him. "Mr. Sutton, I do not know how to thank you for all of this. You have given me far more than I could have hoped for." "Fletcher," he said, "if you are going to be living on my ranch, you should call me Fletcher." "Then you should call me Tessa," she replied. He smiled. "Tessa." The way he said her name, soft and careful, made something flutter in her chest. "You're welcome here. I hope you will stay as long as you like." There was weight behind those words, layers of meaning Tessa did not quite dare to examine. She nodded, unable to trust her voice, and Fletcher left her to settle in. Alone in the cabin, Tessa sat down on the bed and let herself feel the full weight of relief. She had a place to stay, work to do, food to eat, and safety. She had not realized how heavy the burden of uncertainty had been until it lifted. She took off Fletcher's coat and folded it carefully, running her hands over the worn sheepskin. Tomorrow she would return it to him. Tomorrow she would begin her new life as a worker on his ranch. But tonight, she let herself acknowledge the truth she had been avoiding. She was falling in love with Fletcher Sutton, the cowboy who had wrapped his coat around her shoulders and changed the course of her life. Over the next weeks, Tessa settled into a routine. She woke at dawn, helped Mrs. Chen prepare breakfast for Fletcher and the ranch hands, then spent the day cleaning, cooking, and mending. The work was hard but satisfying, and for the first time in years, Tessa felt useful. Chen was patient and kind, teaching her to make bread and stew, showing her how to manage a household on the frontier. Fletcher was often gone during the day, working with the cattle or repairing fences, but he always returned for the evening meal. Tessa found herself looking forward to those meals, to the conversation, and the way Fletcher would ask about her day, genuinely interested in her answers. He treated her with respect, never crossing the line into impropriety, but there was a warmth in his gaze that made her heart race. One evening in late February, after supper had been cleared away, Fletcher asked Tessa to walk with him. They strolled along the creek, the setting sun painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. The air was still cold, but spring was beginning to whisper its arrival in the budding trees and the sound of water running free of ice. "You have been here almost a month," Fletcher said. "How are you finding the work?" "I enjoy it," Tessa said honestly. "Mrs. Chen is wonderful, and the ranch is beautiful. I feel more at home here than I have in a long time." Fletcher nodded, his hands shoved in his coat pockets. "I'm glad. You have been a great help. Mrs. Chen says she does not know how she managed without you." They walked in silence for a moment, and Tessa sensed Fletcher wanted to say something more. She waited, her heartbeat quickening. "Tessa," Fletcher began, then stopped. He took a deep breath and started again. "I need to be honest with you. I did not offer you work just because Mrs. Chen needed help. I mean, she does, but that is not the only reason." Tessa's mouth went dry. "What do you mean?" Fletcher stopped walking and turned to face her. In the fading light, his eyes were serious. "From the moment I saw you shivering in that wagon, I knew there was something special about you. The way you held your head high despite your circumstances, the way you refused to accept defeat even when you had every right to give up. I admired that. I admired you." "Fletcher," Tessa whispered. "Let me finish," he said gently. "Over these past weeks, getting to know you, watching you work and laugh and become part of this place, I have come to care for you deeply. More than I probably should, given the short time we have known each other. But I cannot help how I feel." Tessa's heart was pounding so hard she was certain he could hear it. "I care for you too," she said, the words tumbling out. "I've been trying not to, trying to be practical and sensible, but I cannot help it either." Fletcher's face broke into a wide smile. "Then I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. You do not have to say yes. You can stay on as Mrs. Chen's helper for as long as you want, and nothing will change. But I have to ask, or I will regret it for the rest of my life." "Ask me," Tessa said. Fletcher reached out and took her hands in his. "Tessa Malone, will you let me court you properly? Will you give me the chance to prove that I can make you happy, that we can build a life together here?" Tessa felt tears prick her eyes. "Yes," she said, her voice shaking. "Yes, Fletcher, I would like that very much." Fletcher pulled her into his arms, and Tessa went willingly, resting her head against his chest. She could hear his heart beating as fast as her own. They stood like that for a long moment, wrapped in each other, the creek murmuring beside them and the stars beginning to appear overhead. "I promise I will take care of you," Fletcher murmured into her hair. "You will never be cold or hungry or alone again." "I know," Tessa said, and she meant it. Fletcher Sutton was a man who kept his promises. That night, lying in her cabin, Tessa could not stop smiling. She thought of the journey that had brought her here, the desperate trade she had made for wagon passage, the way Fletcher had given her his coat without hesitation. It had seemed like a small act of kindness at the time, but it had changed everything. It had brought her to this moment, to this place, to this man who wanted to build a future with her. Over the following months, Fletcher courted Tessa with the same quiet determination he brought to everything else. He brought her wildflowers from the meadows, taught her to ride properly so they could explore the ranch together, and spent every evening he could spare sitting on the porch of her cabin, talking about everything and nothing. He told her about his childhood, about his dreams for the ranch, about the loneliness he had lived with since his parents died. Tessa shared her own stories, the pain of losing her family and her home, the fear and uncertainty of traveling west alone, the hope that had kept her moving forward. Mrs. Chen watched their courtship with approval, occasionally leaving them alone at strategic moments. The ranch hands, a collection of rough but good-hearted men, treated Tessa with respect and made it clear that anyone who did not would answer to Fletcher. By the time summer arrived, Tessa knew she wanted to spend the rest of her life with Fletcher. The ranch felt like home in a way Missouri never had, and Fletcher felt like the other half of her soul, the missing piece she had not known she was searching for. One warm evening in July, as they sat by the creek watching the sunset, Fletcher turned to Tessa and took her hand. "I cannot wait any longer," he said. "I know we have only known each other for 6 months, and and some would say that's not enough time, but I know my own heart. Tessa, I love you. I love your strength and your kindness and the way you have brought light into my life. Will you marry me? Tessa's eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of joy. I love you too, Fletcher. Yes, I will marry you. Fletcher pulled a ring from his pocket, a simple gold band set with a small sapphire. This was my mother's, he said. She would have wanted you to have it. Tessa let him slide the ring onto her finger, and then she was in his arms, kissing him for the first time. The kiss was gentle and sweet, full of promise and hope. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless and smiling. When? Tessa asked. As soon as we can arrange it, Fletcher said. I do not want to waste another day without calling you my wife. They were married 3 weeks later in the small church in Grass Valley with Mrs. Chen and the ranch hands in attendance. Tessa wore a new dress, the first new dress she had owned in years, made from blue fabric that matched her eyes. Fletcher wore his best suit, and when he saw Tessa walking toward him down the aisle, his face lit up with such love that several people in the congregation had to wipe away tears. The ceremony was simple, the vows traditional, but when Fletcher slipped the second ring onto Tessa's finger and the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Tessa felt as if her entire life had been leading to this moment. Everything she had endured, every hardship and loss had brought her here, to this man, to this life. They returned to the ranch that evening, and Fletcher carried Tessa over the threshold of the main house. Mrs. Chen had tactfully taken herself off to her own small cottage, giving the newlyweds privacy. Fletcher set Tessa down in the main room, and they stood looking at each other, suddenly shy. This is your home now, Fletcher said softly. Truly your home. Everything I have is yours. I still cannot believe this is real, Tessa admitted. 6 months ago, I was alone and freezing, trading my only coat for wagon passage. Now I am married to the most wonderful man I have ever known, and I have a home and a family. Not quite a family yet, Fletcher said, a hint of mischief in his eyes. But perhaps we can work on that. Tessa laughed and pulled him down for a kiss. That night, in the bedroom Fletcher had prepared for them, they came together as husband and wife. And Tessa felt complete in a way she never had before. She belonged here. She belonged with him. The months that followed were the happiest of Tessa's life. She threw herself into making the house a true home, sewing curtains and quilts, planting a garden, learning to manage the household accounts. Fletcher consulted her on decisions about the ranch, valuing her opinion and intelligence. They worked side by side during the day and fell into each other's arms at night, building a partnership based on love and respect. In the spring of 1868, Tessa discovered she was pregnant. She told Fletcher one evening after supper, and he picked her up and spun her around, laughing with pure joy. A baby, he said wonderingly. We are going to have a baby. You are going to be a wonderful father, Tessa said, cupping his face in her hands. The pregnancy was difficult at times, but Fletcher was attentive and caring, making sure Tessa rested and ate well. Mrs. Chen fussed over her like a mother hen, preparing special foods and tisanes. The ranch hands became protective, taking on extra work so Tessa would not overtax herself. On a cold November night, with Mrs. Chen and a midwife from town in attendance, Tessa gave birth to a healthy baby boy. Fletcher was pacing outside the bedroom door, and when Mrs. Chen emerged with the news, he burst into the room and knelt beside the bed where Tessa lay, exhausted but radiant, holding their son. He is perfect, Fletcher said, his voice rough with emotion. You are perfect. I love you so much. I love you too, Tessa said, placing the baby in Fletcher's arms. What should we name him? They had discussed names for months, unable to agree. But looking at their son, dark-haired and serious-faced even in sleep, the name came to Tessa immediately. James, she said, after your father. Fletcher's eyes filled with tears. James, he repeated. Yes, James Fletcher Sutton. As Tessa watched her husband cradle their son, she thought back to that bitter January day when she had traded her coat for wagon passage, believing she was heading toward an uncertain future with distant relatives. She had not known that she was actually heading toward this, a husband who loved her completely, a son, a home, a life beyond anything she could have imagined. The years passed in a rhythm of seasons and growth. James grew into a strong, curious boy who followed his father everywhere, learning the ways of the ranch. 2 years after James was born, Tessa gave birth to twin girls, Sophie and Clara, who filled the house with laughter and chaos. Fletcher expanded the ranch, buying more land and increasing the herd, and Tessa managed the household and children with capable hands. They faced challenges, as all families do. There were hard winters and dry summers, sick cattle and broken fences, accidents and illnesses. But they faced everything together, their partnership growing stronger with each passing year. The love that had begun with a simple act of kindness, a coat wrapped around cold shoulders, deepened into something unbreakable. Mrs. Chen lived to see James turn 10, passing peacefully in her sleep one winter night. They buried her on a hillside overlooking the ranch, and Tessa made sure fresh flowers were placed on her grave every week. She had been the grandmother Tessa never had, and she missed her terribly. When James was 12, Sophie and Clara 9, Tessa gave birth to another son, whom they named Daniel. Fletcher joked that they were building their own ranch crew, and Tessa laughed and agreed. The house was always full of noise and activity, with children and ranch hands and neighbors coming and going. It was the kind of life Tessa had dreamed of as a lonely girl in Missouri, but had never believed she would achieve. On a warm summer evening in 1880, 13 years after their first meeting, Tessa and Fletcher sat on the porch of their house, watching the sunset. The children were playing by the creek, their laughter carrying on the breeze. The ranch had prospered beyond Fletcher's wildest dreams, and they were planning to build a new barn and hire more hands. "Do you ever think about that day we met?" Tessa asked, leaning against Fletcher's shoulder. "All the time," Fletcher said, wrapping his arm around her. "I think about seeing you in that wagon, shivering and scared but refusing to show it. I think about how close I came to riding past without stopping." "I'm glad you stopped," Tessa said softly. So am I." Fletcher kissed the top of her head. "Best decision I ever made, giving you my coat." "You gave me more than a coat," Tessa said. "You gave me a future, a home, a family. You gave me everything." Fletcher tilted her face up to his. "No," he said seriously. "You gave me everything. Before you, I was just going through the motions, building a ranch but not really living. You brought joy and purpose and love into my life. You made this house a home. You made me complete." Tessa kissed him, a soft, lingering kiss full of 13 years of love and partnership. When they pulled apart, they sat in comfortable silence, watching the sky turn from gold to purple to indigo. James came running up to the porch, his younger siblings trailing behind. "Papa, can we sleep outside tonight, under the stars?" Fletcher looked at Tessa, who nodded. "Why not?" he said. "It is a beautiful night. Your mother and I will join you." They gathered blankets and pillows, and the whole family settled on the grass near the creek. Fletcher pointed out constellations while Tessa told stories. The twins fell asleep first, curled up against Tessa's sides. Daniel followed soon after, sprawled across Fletcher's chest. James lasted the longest, fighting sleep, but eventually even he succumbed, his head on Fletcher's shoulder. Tessa looked at her family, all sleeping peacefully under the stars, and felt a profound sense of gratitude. She thought of the girl she had been, desperate and alone, trading her only coat for passage to an uncertain future. That girl could never have imagined this moment, this happiness, this love. "Thank you," she whispered to Fletcher. He opened his eyes and smiled at her. "For what?" "For stopping that day, for seeing me, for giving me your coat." "I would do it again in a heartbeat," Fletcher said. "Every single moment has led us here, and I would not change a thing." Tessa reached across their sleeping children and took his hand. They lay like that for hours, holding hands across their family, watching the stars wheel overhead. When Tessa finally fell asleep, she was smiling, secure in the knowledge that she was exactly where she belonged. The years continued to pass, bringing their share of joys and sorrows. James grew into a young man who took over more responsibilities on the ranch, learning from Fletcher's example. The twins blossomed into beautiful, spirited young women who kept everyone on their toes. Daniel, the baby, turned out to have a gift with horses and spent hours training the ranch's stock. Fletcher's hair turned gray at the temples, and Tessa found lines around her eyes when she looked in the mirror, but they both agreed they had never been happier. Their love had not faded with time, but had grown deeper and richer, tempered by years of partnership and shared experience. When James was 22, he married a girl from Grass Valley, a sweet-natured young woman named Elizabeth. Fletcher built them a house on the far side of the ranch, keeping the family close. A year later, Tessa became a grandmother for the first time, weeping with joy as she held James's son. The twins married within months of each other, Sophie to a lawyer from Sacramento and Clara to a teacher who took a position in Grass Valley. Both couples visited often, bringing grandchildren for Tessa to spoil. Daniel, now a strapping 18-year-old, showed no signs of settling down, preferring to work with the horses and help his father run the ever-expanding ranch operation. Fletcher did not push him, remembering his own younger years when the ranch had been all that mattered. On their 20th wedding anniversary in July of 1887, Fletcher surprised Tessa with a trip to San Francisco. They left the ranch in James's capable hands and spent a week exploring the city, staying in a fine hotel and dining in restaurants that made Tessa laugh with delight. Fletcher bought her a new coat, a beautiful wool one with fur trim, and when Tessa protested the expense, he simply said, "You traded your only coat for passage to me. The least I can do is make sure you always have one." On their last night in the city, they walked along the waterfront, watching the ships in the harbor. Tessa felt Fletcher's hand find hers, their fingers intertwining automatically after 20 years of marriage. "Do you ever regret it?" Fletcher asked suddenly. "Giving up on reaching your aunt in Oregon, building a life here instead?" Tessa stopped walking and turned to face him. "Fletcher Sutton, I have never regretted a single moment since I met you. You are my family. The ranch is my home. If I had continued to Oregon, I would have missed out on the greatest love of my life. I would have missed everything that matters." Fletcher pulled her close, and they stood together in the gathering darkness, the sound of the sea in their ears and the lights of the city sparkling around them. "I love you, Tessa, more today than yesterday, and I will love you more tomorrow than today." "That is from the poem I showed you," Tessa said, laughing through tears. "I remember everything you have ever told me," Fletcher said. "Every word, every story, every dream. They are all precious to me because you are precious to me." They returned to the ranch the next week, and Tessa threw herself back into the daily routine with renewed energy. The grandchildren were growing, the ranch was thriving, and she and Fletcher were growing old together, just as they had always planned. As the seasons turned and the years continued their steady march, Tessa often found herself thinking about that desperate girl in the wagon, freezing in January cold, who had traded everything for a chance at a new life. She thought about the cowboy who had seen her struggling and had wrapped his coat around her shoulders without asking for anything in return. That single act of kindness had changed two lives forever. It had been the beginning of a love story that would span decades, a partnership that would build a legacy, a family that would spread roots deep into California soil. On a crisp autumn day in 1895, Tessa and Fletcher stood on the porch of the house they had built together 28 years earlier. James was running the ranch now, doing an excellent job, and Fletcher had officially retired, though he still rode out every morning to check on the cattle and the land he loved. Their grandchildren played in the yard, a rowdy group ranging from teenagers to toddlers. The twins had both had more children, and James's family had grown to include 4 sons and 2 daughters. Daniel had finally married 2 years ago, and his wife was expecting their first child in the spring. "We built something good here," Fletcher said, watching his grandchildren play. "We did," Tessa agreed. "Better than I ever dreamed possible." Fletcher took her hand and raised it to his lips. "It all started with a coat," Tessa smiled. "It started with you seeing someone in need and choosing to help. It started with kindness." "It started with love," Fletcher corrected gently. "I think I fell in love with you the moment I saw you, sitting in that wagon, too proud to show how scared you were. I just did not know it yet." "And I fell in love with you when you wrapped your coat around me," Tessa said, "because you gave me warmth when you could have ridden past. You gave me hope when I had almost none left. You gave me everything I never knew I needed." They stood together on the porch as the sun set over the ranch, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Their hands were clasped tight, their shoulders touching, two people who had found each other against all odds and built a life filled with love, laughter, and family. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of pine and cattle and the rich earth of the valley. Tessa breathed deeply, committing the moment to memory. She was 63 years old now, and Fletcher was 68, and they had been blessed beyond measure. "Thank you for stopping that day," Tessa said again, as she had said 1,000 times over the years. "Thank you for accepting my coat," Fletcher replied, as he always did. And there, on the porch of the house they had built with their own hands, surrounded by the family they had created and the land they had nurtured, Tessa and Fletcher Sutton held each other close and watched another beautiful sunset paint the California sky. The children called them in for supper, and they went inside together, hand in hand, ready for whatever the evening would bring. Because that was what they had always done, from that first cold January day to this warm autumn evening and all the days in between. They had faced life together, and they would continue to face it together until their last breath. And when Fletcher finally passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 81, with Tessa holding his hand and their children and grandchildren gathered around, his last words were, "I love you. Thank you for letting me give you my coat." Tessa lived for 3 more years after Fletcher's death, surrounded by her loving family. She spent her days tending her garden, playing with her great-grandchildren, and telling stories about the early days of the ranch and the cowboy who had given her his coat. When she finally joined Fletcher in the small cemetery on the hillside, her children made sure she was buried wearing the wool coat with fur trim that Fletcher had bought her in San Francisco. And in her hands they placed the worn sheepskin coat that had started it all, the coat Fletcher had kept carefully preserved in a trunk for nearly 4 decades. On her gravestone, beside Fletcher's, they carved a simple epitaph. She traded her only coat for Wagon passage. The cowboy wrapped his around her shoulders, and from that simple kindness grew a love that lasted a lifetime. The ranch continued to thrive under James's leadership, and then under his sons after him. The story of Fletcher and Tessa became family legend, told and retold to each new generation, a reminder that kindness and love can change everything, that a single moment can alter the course of multiple lives. And on cold January days, when the wind blows through the valley and frost glitters on the grass, those who know the story swear they can see 2 figures walking hand in hand along the creek, a tall cowboy and a small woman wrapped in his coat, still together, still in love, still proving that some bonds are too strong for even death to break. The house still stands, maintained lovingly by Fletcher and Tessa's descendants. The cabin where Tessa first stayed has been restored and turned into a small museum, displaying artifacts from the early days of the ranch. And in the main house, hanging in a place of honor above the fireplace, is the sheepskin coat that started it all, preserved and protected, a tangible reminder of the day. A desperate woman traded everything for passage, and a compassionate cowboy gave her not just warmth, but a future filled with love.